you're right. Those who are survivors of a suicide, a family member survivor of someone that died by suicide, are more likely to attempt suicide themselves. I don't know the exact stat, but that's a commonly heard fact in the world of suicide prevention. And you're right. So it's not just 135 fewer folks mourning the loss of a veteran. It's potentially 135 fewer folks suffering or potentially slipping into crisis themselves.
Welcome to Your Story Doesn't End Here, the mental health podcast of military and veterans who refuse to be silenced. I'm your host, Rachel, and my mission with this podcast is to be a voice for those who don't have a voice, bring awareness to mental health issues, provide value and solutions, and to change the culture when it comes to mental health within the DoD organizations. Hey everyone, and thank you so much for coming back for another episode of Your Story Doesn't End Here. Today's guest is Nick Howland, who is the executive director of the Firewatch Florida's fight to end veteran suicide. Nick is a Navy veteran, defense industry executive, husband, and father of 2 boys. After serving 4 years as a naval officer, Nick spent the next 20 years leading U.S. defense manufacturing businesses focused on protective products for soldiers, airmen, and sailors, including body armor, life rafts, and tactical boats. In late 2019, Nick helped found the Firewatch, which is helping reduce veteran suicide in Florida. Wow, you have quite the resume, Nick. I feel like there's a bunch of things we could get into, but first off, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show today.
Rachel, thank you for having me. I look forward to this conversation.
Absolutely. And just to kind of lay the foundation for the conversation that we're about to go into, there's one word or few words that you could use to describe how you are feeling today going into this. How would you describe that?
I'm feeling excited. And the reason I'm feeling excited is because at some point during this conversation, I'm sure I will reveal some data that we got at the Firewatch talking about veteran suicides in Florida. Important data. Consistent data, what I think is groundbreaking data, and I look forward to sharing it.
That's awesome. I'm excited too. I think I got a sneak peek into some of that data before we started the recording. So really excited for you to share that with the listeners. And I'm just going to pass it off to you to share a little bit more about yourself, what you're doing, and where you came from.
All right. Well, thank you, Rachel. I appreciate that. I'm born and raised in Chicago, went to college, and then, as you mentioned, I did 4 years in the Navy after college. I was in 95 to 99. So I got out before 9/11, a couple years before 9/11. I was in business school during 9/11. And while I was there, I knew when those towers came down, I knew that all my friends that were on ships, because I had done a few years on a destroyer, and who were on SEAL teams, because I had done a couple years as an officer in command at a SEAL boat team where we dropped off the SEALs and picked them off. Not a SEAL myself, just someone who dropped them off and picked them up. I knew that they were getting ready to go into prolonged conflict, increased op tempo. And I made the decision in business school to get into the defense industry, was in that, as you mentioned, the bio for roughly 20 years. And that whole time I'm watching kind of the American community barely involved or paying attention to this fierce global war on terror going on overseas. I'm watching my friends who are going to sea 6 months out of the year instead of what they had signed up for 6 months out of every 2 years, or my SEAL friends going to Iraq or Afghanistan 4 or 5 times in a span of 5 or 6 years. I'm watching broken relationships. I'm watching folks get out of the service and wondering, gosh, all I've done is war. I don't know what to do now. Loss of sense of purpose. So I'm watching this among my friends, my colleagues, and some veteran advocates in 2019 in Northeast Florida, myself included, decided we kind of had enough, particularly when you see veteran suicide numbers. They had, since the global war on terror started, they have been steadily increasing. We're losing veterans at a rate 2 times that of civilians. And in Northeast Florida, a bunch of us decided, let's get together and try to do something. We sat around a whiteboard and the Firewatch was created. Basically, what we wanted to do was end veteran suicide by preventing veteran suicide. And the way that we would prevent veteran suicide is engaging the community in Northeast Florida to learn the warning signs of veterans in crisis and help get them to the help they need. You know, it wasn't out of a sense of guilt that we all did this necessarily, more out of a sense of duty. And a hard word for folks who weren't in the service to necessarily understand, but an easy word for those who were. to understand, and an obligation to our, teammates and battle buddies and shipmates who had fought the war over the last 20 years. We decided to get off the sidelines and do something about it. And that's how the Firewatch was created.
That is incredible. And what's really key to me and what you said is that you decided to focus on prevention,
Yeah.
not reaction. And I think that's something that's starting to come more to light now as people are starting to realize that the resources to be reactive are really dwindling. And then when you start getting into the world of reactivity, then now you have to find something to curate specifically to that person, especially in the realm of suicide, mental health. Not every therapist is the right therapist for every person. Not every modality of therapy is the right modality for every person. And there's a lot more to it when you start getting reactive. But now you're also on a timeline when you're reactive and someone is already in that suicidal state. And so I think it's incredible to see organizations such as Firewatch that really focus on the prevention piece. Can you talk a little bit more about what exactly Firewatch is doing?
Yeah, you hit it on the head. Again, we want to end veteran suicide by preventing veteran suicide. And we believe that if we can get veterans the help and resources they need before they slip into crisis, then we can end veteran suicide. So our cornerstone program, the main initiative we have, is called the Watchstander program. Anyone who's been in the service understands. You understand. It's your standing watch. Your standing watch for others. When you stand watch, for example, let's say you're standing watch on deck on a destroyer at sea. You are not the one who's going to solve every problem. You're not the one who, if there's a fire down in the main space, you're going to don your flash gear and go put out that fire. You're the one who's supposed to determine that there's alarms going off, that something's different, and to call in the experts to solve the problem. That's what we're asking watchstanders to do. Again, our program was inspired by CPR. We have a short 30 to 40-minute training program that teaches you to recognize the signs of a veteran that's in crisis, how to ask them if they need help, how to validate their experience, and how to expedite getting them to the help they need, to refer them to the help they need. Just like CPR. CPR is not training you to be the paramedic or the cardiologist. They're training you to know when there's something wrong and to call for help quick. That's what our watchstanders do. We now have trained over 6,500 watchstanders in the state of Florida. And by a survey that we give out quarterly, we know that they're engaging with veterans and that they're referring veterans to help.
So how are you training people? And it sounds like kind of a, I don't want to say dumb question, but I know someone listening might have this question, so I'm going to ask it anyway. How are you training people to identify veterans, but also identify when veterans are in crisis? And that might be a lengthy answer. Maybe somehow you can summarize it for people to just get an understanding, because it sounds like a big task to some people.
Yeah. With the help of data. That's how we're doing it. So at the same time we launched that Watchstander program, we reached out with a partner in town who's a data analytics firm doing it pro bono, reached out to the Florida Department of Health and said, we want to see all your raw data on death certificates where veteran is checked and suicide is checked as the cause of death. We don't want to see names. We just want to see addresses, zips, if veteran is checked and suicide checked. And we get all the raw data now every year from the Florida Department of Health. And we're able to determine not only by county within Florida, but by zip code within the county where our veteran suicides are happening. And once we look at it geographically, we can also sort by age, race, gender, and means. So we know where our hotspots are. So we use that information to know where we're going to train people to become watchstanders. We get businesses involved. For example, if we know that there's a high veteran suicide count in Middleburg, Florida, in Clay County, we can go to churches, libraries, the police department there, businesses, and we can train their employees or members as watchstanders, thereby increasing that network of people standing by to encounter a veteran in crisis. The goal being to train watchstanders and have them ready to intervene where veterans live, work, and play. So that's how we do it. And I mentioned before, our training partner is an organization called Psych Armor. They're the nation's leading military and veteran training, online training, cultural affinity nonprofit out of San Diego. They built the training module for us. Again, it's 30 to 40 minutes. It's simple, easy, and free. That way, there's no barriers to people taking the training. We want as many people as we can, particularly in the places where veterans are at highest risk. That's how we do it, Rachel, and it's working. We have high rates of engagement among our veterans, among our watchstanders with veterans, and we have high rates of referral where our watchstanders are referring veterans to resources. The VA utilization in Northeast Florida, where we started, where we have 4,000 of our 6,500 veterans, is up considerably. Calls to 211 and 988 up considerably. So we're getting veterans the help they need. We're preventing veteran suicide.
It's incredible how just something as simple as teaching people what to look out for and how to intervene just enough to where they don't feel like they're taking on all the problems of the VA or all the problems that exist in the veteran community, how that can make such a difference.
Yeah.
And, it's 30 to 45 minutes. I mean, it's not like it's this crazy master's degree course where people have to really understand all the ins and outs of the human psyche and learn all these crazy terms. And I mean, it's just simply learning that prevention piece, just like CPR. And CPR can be kind of intimidating to learn too. I mean, I've gone through the course several times, and you never want to have to use CPR, but knowing that skill and having it, knowing that in the case that I would have to use CPR, instead of standing by and watching someone pass away because I didn't have the skills, I have the skills to be able to do this. I'm curious because when we talk about the realm of CPR, oftentimes you have that dispatcher on the phone that's explaining to someone what to do in that situation if maybe they aren't comfortable with it. Are you working also with first responders in this realm, or is this mainly just people that don't have any sort of training that get the training through Firewatch?
That's a great question. In fact, just last week, we were training members of the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office on the Watchstander program. Now, some of them could be trained in critical incident training, CIT. So they know how cops in general know how to talk to people and things like that, know how to observe things. But part of our training involves a military veteran cultural affinity piece. It's only about a 10 or 15 minute video in the training, but for those first responders who don't have a military or veteran background, it can be pretty meaningful. So yeah, we are working with first responders. There's a county in Florida, Baker County, that's trained its entire fire and rescue department. I think they find it, in fact, all of St. Johns County fire and police, we've dropped off little wallet cards that we use for our watchstanders. And that I'll shift now away from answering your question, but answer something related to it.
Go for it.
When you mentioned your experience with CPR, over time, I'm 51. So back in 1989, when I was 16, getting my first job, I trained to be a lifeguard, and I took a 2-day CPR course. But that was 2 days. And I remember there was a dummy, and we had to do the compressions and the breath. And then once I was done with the breaths, I had to wipe with the dummy's mouth, and the next person would come up and do it. It was like a 2-day in-class and in-person exercise to get the certificate. Now you can pay $35 and get online and take a half-an-hour course, and all they're doing is teaching you to pump the chest to stay alive. So they have decided, rightfully so, I believe, to make CPR easier, more accessible for folks, because to them, an intervention such as you sitting at the Thanksgiving table and seeing your uncle you haven't seen for a few years gain some weight and saying to that uncle, you should go get your cholesterol checked. That's as successful as an intervention as that uncle going into cardiac arrest and you doing chest compressions. Right. So the more people out there, the more community members trained, the more community members aware, the more upstream interventions can occur. So our program is designed to be simple for that very reason. And there's another element of the Watchstander program that I like to talk about. We try to create a community of watchstanders. So after we've trained, it's not a fire and forget thing. After we've trained, a week later, we send you a package that has a wristband. I'm wearing mine right now. Only watchstanders get them. A wallet card, a car sticker, a certificate, and then you're on our newsletter. We ask you if you're referring veterans on continually. So we try to create a bit of a culture around it. And it makes it so people, the real reason we do that is so people feel some degree of obligation. So when they do see that veteran, they'll take action. They'll ask the veteran how they're doing and take action. That's part of it. So if it was just train and forget, it wouldn't be as effective. But because people stay involved, I think they feel an obligation beyond just taking the training that they will intervene when called upon.
I love that. And I think that there's this community piece in not just the world of suicide prevention, but that's starting to come out amongst a lot of organizations across the US and across the world, where people are starting to understand that when you build a sense of community, a
Yep.
sense of, if I don't know what to do, I have someone to bounce questions off of, or just that reminder that I did this thing and there's other people that did this thing and I have this obligation, that creates so much of a stronger backbone too. And so I love, love, love that you have that community piece attributed with this. And then that reminder, the wristband of, you
Yep.
did this training and you hold a certain responsibility that can maybe seem heavy at times, but it's important. And the
That's it.
more people in this community, the less of that heaviness one individual has to bear, because there's a whole community behind. And so that is absolutely incredible. Are you expanding to national, or do you do any trainings across the nation? Or are you mainly just focusing in that local area?
Yeah, well, we started in Northeast Florida, and about 2 years into our programming, the Florida Department of Veteran Affairs said, "Hey, we like what you're doing up there. Can you expand elsewhere?" Together, FDVA, the Florida Department of Affairs, we looked at the data across the state, and we determined there's two hotspots that we need to address besides Northeast Florida. It's the Hillsborough Pinellas, so the Tampa area, and the Palm Beach Broward, so the West Palm Fort Lauderdale area. That's where we're the other two parts of the state that we're having the highest rates of veteran suicide. So I now have 5 employees. So with 5 employees and 4 community vendor partners and 6,500 watchstanders now, we deliver this program statewide. So it's pretty thinly staffed, but it helps that my employees are the 4 others. I'm a scrub, but the 4 others are just like awesome.
Yeah.
One of them, the guy who trains everybody in Northeast Florida, Marine, Derek Collins, often shares this story, which I think is such a great story. He was in a Marine, gosh, he's about my age, so early 50s, and he was in the 1980s or early 90s. He was in Camp Lejeune, and it was a hot day, and I think his company had to muster somewhere a few miles away, and his squad didn't have a car, so they had their packs on, and they were hiking through the hot, summer weather, and the 5 or 6 of them, and they heard a truck drive by, and there was another squad on the back of the truck, and there was obviously room for those 5. And my Derek remembers all 5 of them in their squad, as they're sweating and walking to this place they were supposed to muster, they all look at the truck that drives by, and they watch it go, and then about 50 yards ahead, the truck stops, it backs up, and the driver yells out, "Hey, you guys want to ride?" And they all look at their squad leader, and the squad leader looks at him and say, "We're Marines. We don't ask for help, but when we're offered help, we take it." And then they all jumped on the car and they went to the spot. Why that's why that's so important is that's how veterans are. Veterans don't ask for help, but if offered help, they'll take it. That's why watchstanders out there who are trained to reach out and ask a veteran if they're doing okay, we think is going to help solve the problem of veteran suicide. It's going to get veterans more quickly to the resources they need and keep them from slipping into crisis.
Oh, that's such a key thing to talk about, is most people in the veteran community aren't going to ask for help, but if offered help, they'll take it.
That's it.
And then, the part to it that you seem to be doing really well with Firewatch is training people to offer help, because I think so many people feel uncomfortable still with that conversation surrounding suicide. I mean, there's still such a stigma that exists in the veteran community that I think perpetuates a lot from the active duty community, because, it's just, people don't like to ask for help. I still don't even like to ask for help most of the time. And, I've been a veteran for a good 2 years now. I'm going on 3 years. And it's really difficult to, in most areas where the support like Firewatch doesn't exist, to be like, oh, well, it's just as simple as, ask someone if they need help. Well, then people are usually like, well, how do you do that? Because how do you casually just bring up, at the dinner table or in a conversation, like, are you suicidal? And I think that's what a lot of trainings, oftentimes, at least I know in the military, I took the, what's it called? The safe talk. I don't know if that was a thing still when you were in, or if that was a thing that came out in the last few years. I'm not really sure how old that program is, but, and that they tell you to just straight up ask people, are you going to suicide, or are you thinking about taking your life? And for a lot of people, that conversation is very, very uncomfortable to have. I don't really know how to ask this question, the way that it's formulating in my head, but how do you get people past that stigma that exists in their own head. Because I think that even with the Safe Talk programs that exist, I still didn't see an increase on military bases of people having conversations about mental health and suicide. That I really saw it make that big of an impact. I guess I'm not looking at the data necessarily, but I know a lot of people took this course on military bases, and from the outside in, I didn't really see a difference. And so obviously there's something that Firewatch is doing differently than a lot of these other suicide prevention programs that exist out there that are mainly just educating around what to do in that crisis state. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Well, absolutely. Of course, the folks who want to train on our program are folks who care deeply about veterans. They're not always veterans or military families themselves. We found out of our 6,500, 70% of them are actually civilians. They probably have some tie to the military, but they report as civilians versus veteran. But I think the way we break down that stigma, the way that we encourage asking the question, is basically talking about it and dispelling the myth that asking the question will lead someone to try suicide. And that's a big part of our training. The SAVE training, which is a component of the training in the module that PsychArmor built for us, is a 22-minute training that's like Safe Talk. It's an acronym. Signs, recognize them, ask the question, validate the experience, expedite getting them help, SAVE. And we spent a lot of time talking about, even before we get into the acronyms in that training, the myths that exist that are not true. Talking about suicide is not going to lead someone to suicide. So that's how you get people more comfortable saying, are you thinking of hurting yourself? Or this problem is serious. Have you thought of, have you thought about suicide? And then trying to draw that out of them, because chances are that individual, if they have thought about suicide, are going to tell you yes. And then you're going to be able to help them get the direct help that they need. You made the point, the maybe not in the active duty military, because there's cultural aspects of it that still are barriers to self-reporting, to asking for help, all that kind of thing. But outside, I think America is starting, the stigma is starting to change. You can see it with some of the direct services that are now almost household names. 988. I mean, everyone knows that right now, not just in our little, veteran suicide prevention community, but everyone knows that they can call 988 instead of 911 if they're having a mental health crisis, or that they can direct their family member to call, or that they can do a warm handoff calling. You see the advertisements all over. I think that's an indication that the stigma is starting to change. Suicide's always been taboo in America. Mental health has always been underinvested. I think all of that is changing now, and that's for the better.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's say that someone that has been trained as a watchstander does come across someone that's in a mental health crisis and they do answer yes to all the questions. Is there a network of resources to take that person through the next steps, or are they just trained to pass them off straight to 911? What would a scenario like that look like?
Generally, I mean, if they're in acute critical crisis, the watchstanders are taught during our training to, how to ask them, validate their experience, and then expedite getting them the help. Usually a warm handoff to 988 or 911 if there's a weapon involved. Always 911 if there's a weapon involved. But our program is very simple, and it's just like doing compressions to staying alive. They really, the ideal is not having all those community early intervention gatekeepers performing clinical services. The idea is getting the victim or the potential victim to help fast. So our program is very, very simple. And I'm holding up one of the wallet cards that everyone receives. If they're in crisis, you call 988. If they just need help, you call 211. We have a QR code for Florida veteran resources on there that you can scan and share with the veteran if you need to. And at any time, for any reason, Florida has a helpline 24/7, 844 My Florida Vet. And on that line, you could hand that veteran off to that line. They'll assess suicidality. They're all trained to do so. They're trained crisis care coordinators and mental health crisis technicians. And they're trained to refer folks to resources if they're not directly in crisis. So it's that simple. 988 if in crisis, 211 if not. Anytime, 844 My Florida Vet. We also have an app too that we're trying to figure out how to get watchstanders to adopt it more frequently. But that app enables you to do the warm handoff directly from the app or check resources directly from the app. So it's not a clinical training program, it's a referral training program, just like CPR has been trending.
Right. Yeah, the reason I asked that question is because the old mentality of suicide prevention was, if someone's in crisis and we're reacting to it, is to just straight up send them 911 straight to
Yeah.
a psych ward every time. And I think
Yeah.
that's what really perpetuated the stigma itself, because people in mental health crisis that maybe didn't need that level of intervention
Yeah.
felt like if I go ask for help, the first thing someone's going to do, and it's still, people still do this in areas of, I know on the active duty side, people that are not properly trained, their first instinct is, oh, let's call 911, let's get them to an ER. And that's not always what people need. And so I love that there are options and QR codes and resources so that it's not just, hey, I'm feeling depressed, I'm not necessarily going to take my life, and I don't need to go to an ER. What resources can you give me? As opposed to, I'm feeling depressed and someone freaking out and going, oh, I'm going to call 911 right now because I don't want to be responsible for you taking your life. Like, not everyone has that level of need to go straight to the ER. And so I'm grateful that there is that level of resources just in someone's back pocket to say, here you go.
Well, and we haven't even gotten to the big data reveal yet. But one little piece of data that we collect quarterly, the data on veteran suicides we collect annually, and we just got it, which is why I want to talk about it. But the one little piece of data we collect quarterly is how our watchstanders, are they doing what we ask them to do? Are they engaging with veterans? Are they referring veterans? And we found that every quarter, over 80% of the veterans that answer the survey are engaging with veterans. It's more like 85, 86%. Most of the time they're engaging at their place of work and occasionally at family events, next up at family events. And then the other question becomes, are they referring veterans? And about a third of watchstanders every quarter are reporting referring veterans to help. And the most frequent referral destination is healthcare. So, VA healthcare and either physical or mental health. The second most frequently referred destination is to veteran service officers. And that box is either county veteran service officers, VA veteran service officers, or chartered constitutional nonprofits like American Legion or Vietnam Veterans or VFWs. So we're able to track with that survey where these things are happening. And we're finding, as we kind of expected, it's not, the vast majority is not in crisis. It's not to 988. It's a referral using our QR code or 211 or the individual watchstander's knowledge of what resources are out there. So that is good data for us, because that means that what's happening is we are getting those veterans when they're showing early signs that could lead to suicidality, not when they're showing crisis signs of being in the midst of suicidality.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just think about the numbers that would exist if programs like this didn't exist. I mean, we talk about 22 a day and how long it takes someone to get to that point of pain where they are ready to take their own life. If we can catch more people this early on, then those numbers are naturally going to decrease. So that is incredible. Are you ready for the big data reveal?
I'm ready for the reveal.
All right, drum roll. I don't have the sound effects. All right, go for it.
We started the Firewatch in 2019 in Northeast Florida. We consider that our baseline year. When we launched the Watchstander program, we also collected data, as I mentioned, from the Florida Department of Health. So we consider 2019 our baseline, and our big kind of high kind of attainment, hairy goal was to try to see if we could prove systemic veteran suicide reduction, 3 years of reduced veteran suicides, 25% below that 2019 baseline. We just got our third year of data, that's 2022. So 20, 21, and 22. And we have achieved 3 years consecutively of a 25% decrease from that 2019 number. We never thought we'd achieve that 3-year goal in our first 3 years, and we did. And it's extraordinarily exciting. The 2019 number is the 2022 number is 27% below 2019. If you compare that to That's Northeast Florida suicides. If you compare that to the rest of the state's only 1% down.
Wow.
Yep. And if you compare that to Northeast Florida civilian suicides during that same period, they're up 9%.
Wow.
So we are showing the best veteran suicide reductions in the state. And I would guess when the VA comes out with their numbers later in the year, the best suicide reduction numbers in the country
Wow.
in North Florida. We're beyond excited. And the best part is we can drill down. If you actually look at those three numbers, 2020, 2021, 2022, you can drill down on where where the suicides are happening, the age, the race, the gender. We know which counties are doing well and which are not doing as well. One of the really pleasing things we're seeing in Northeast Florida is that the 35 to 50-year-old, 35 to 54-year-old age group is way down from when we started. And in Northeast Florida, when we started in 2019, it was the highest of the age groups. Now it's way down.
Wow.
But we're also worried one age group has risen, and that's 65 and older. So the data is mostly peaches and cream, but not all peaches and cream, because we're worried about that little trend. And that was a little rise that emerged from 2021 to 2022. And we're working with the local United Way, Northeast Florida, to figure out what could be happening. We think it's related to the housing crisis and inflation and financial crisis. Pensioners who are trying to who can't afford as much on their fixed pensions. So that's one theory we're trying to test out. But the fact that we can even isolate that, and we know what zip codes those older veterans are dying in by suicide, is groundbreaking. It gives us a path forward for how we can work specifically to stem the tide of those suicides in those areas.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that sit down in front of a whiteboard or a table and say, we're going to solve veteran suicide. I mean, I can't imagine how many people do that every single year.
Yeah.
And how many organizations start that maybe I'm not saying that they're not making a difference, but to be able to make that big of a difference in a short period of time, in 2019 to 2022 even, is a very, very short period of time for a nonprofit to have numbers like that. So that is absolutely incredible. And kudos to Firewatch and, everything that the entire community is doing, because it really is a community effort. That is incredible. And it'd be really cool to see that spread across the entire nation and realistically be a model for veterans across the globe. But I'm curious what your next big, hairy, audacious goal is for Firewatch.
Oh, man. Well, we want to deliver those results across the rest of the state. And we'd like to then, given that we think the model's proven in a region of Florida, we want to prove it definitively statewide. There's another piece of data that I didn't share with you, and that is, I mentioned that I've got 5 employees, 3 in Northeast Florida, including myself, 1 in the Tampa area and 1 in the Palm Beach area. They've been operating there now for about 2 years. So we have the 2021 baseline and the 2022 data for them. And we're seeing really promising declines in those regions too. If you actually add up where we are in Florida versus where we're not, Northeast Florida, Tampa Bay area, Southeast Florida, where we are, suicides among veterans are down 16% from our baseline. Where we're not, they're up 8%.
Wow.
So we basically want to expand as much as we can in the hotspot areas, which next would be the Space Coast and the Pensacola area. And I think within 2 or 3 years, we're proving our model statewide. And then the sky's the limit. We need to adopt this in our other high risks, risk states, Texas by number, Alaska by rate, and all sorts of states. I think that'll be imperative. It's got broader community implications too, Rachel. I mean, as you know, veterans contribute so much to our society. And there's this interesting statistic between 2019 and 2022 in Northeast Florida, 103 less veterans have died from the baseline number, 103. American Association of Suicidology reports that 135 people in every community are affected by every single suicide. So you multiply 103 veterans who have died by 135 people, nearly 14,000 fewer members of our community are mourning the loss of a veteran family member, friend, or loved one. in Northeast Florida over the last 3 years. I want that many fewer times the population of Florida veterans. I want that many fewer across Texas, across Alaska. That's the goal. And I think we're achieving it here. I'd like to achieve it everywhere else.
Yeah, there's another statistic I saw in the stuff that was sent to me on the email thread that we had going before we spoke today. There was a statistic in a link that said something about, I don't have it pulled up right now, but about how people that are affected by suicide are more likely to be depressed themselves. And I think that's something that's not talked about too, is the waves of how a suicide, just one suicide, affects an entire community, and not only their mental health, but also just how they function as a society. If that person had a huge impact, even if that person didn't have a huge societal impact, they had an impact in some way. And so it is so much more broad than just 22 a day. I mean, 22 a day, you can multiply that.
Such a great point, because you're right. Those who are survivors of a suicide, a family member survivor of someone that died by suicide, are more likely to attempt suicide themselves. I don't know the exact stat, but that's a commonly heard fact in the world of suicide prevention. And you're right. So it's not just 135 fewer folks mourning the loss of a veteran. It's potentially 135 fewer folks suffering or potentially slipping into crisis themselves. Great point.
Absolutely. How much support does it take on the back end, the things that people don't see, to run this Firewatch program?
Well, it's 5 employees. 3 of them are on the road training businesses and churches and organizations 24/7. Well,
wow.
5 or 6 days a week, not 24/7.
Feels like it, I'm sure.
Yeah. And 2 of us are in the back end managing the program. I've got a program administrator that works with our 4 vendor partners, Psych Armor, which handles the training module, NLP Logics, which collects the data for us, 19 Technology, which does our website and app, and Dalton Agency, which does all of our marketing. Those are our 4 big community partners, and my program administrator manages them. I set the strategic direction of the organization. I do a lot of the outward facing things. I do all the back end HR and finance and everything like that. So we managed to do it leanly with a group of 5. Now that would have to scale up as we expand. But the good thing is, I think the marginal costs to expand it are smaller because we spent a lot of the development costs to create the program.
Right.
So it's pretty exciting. I think we could hit the whole state probably with 12 employees.
Wow.
And veteran suicide in Florida.
You guys are doing a lot. That's a lot of work. That's incredible, though. It's not easy to get together a small group of people and create something that works like such a well-oiled machine. And I'm sure you've come across your kinks and your obstacles and challenges. Obviously, I don't know everything that's happened over the last few years, but to create this big of an impact with a small group of people that is working so efficiently, that is very hard to do. And so that's absolutely incredible.
It's because our 6,500 watchstanders are community heroes. They're getting veterans to help. That's why the 5 of us just train them, and they're the ones doing the work to get veterans to the help they need.
That's awesome. Where can people find you, and where can they support?
Well, that's a great question. Thank you. You can find us at thefirewatch.org. On that website, you can see the data. You can sign up to be a watchstander. You can take the training online yourself for free at thefirewatch.org. And that's how we get watchstanders more to join the fight to end veteran suicide every day when we can't be training in person, is our online module. So it's free, available to anybody. We'd love to have any listener join us in the fight to end veteran suicide by going to thefirewatch.org.
So that training online, that anyone in the nation can take that. That's not just limited to Florida.
Anyone can take it, although it's Florida centric because it teaches you about the resources available in the state of Florida. But the SAVE training itself is universally applicable. And can be applied anywhere.
That's awesome. Do you guys accept donations at all for what you're doing, or is there another way to support on the financial side for people that want to maybe explore that?
We welcome donations, and you can also donate at thefirewatch.org. And That's so important because we talked about it before. We don't want there to be any barriers to someone wanting to join the fight to end veteran suicide, to someone wanting to take the training. Time is a barrier, so we've limited the training to an impactful 30 to 40 minutes. And money is a barrier, so we maintain the training free for everybody. And we do that with generous contributions from the community.
That's awesome. And then at social media sites as well? I
Yep.
assume?
Yeah, Your Turn to Stand is generally our handle at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Your Turn to Stand. Your Turn to
Awesome.
Stand watch, basically.
My listeners are probably sick of hearing me say this, but social media is free. Go
Yep.
at least like, support, share. You never know who out there in your network needs this information, even if you don't need this information. And so that if there's one thing that you can do and you're listening and you're like, I'm not in the area, how do I make an impact? At least the social media impact, social media is worldwide.
Yep.
And it's free. So at least do that if you can. But if you're able to take the trainings too, I'm definitely going to explore this stuff myself. I'm really excited for what you guys are doing down there. I keep connecting with all these people in Florida that are doing all these incredible things. And I'm like, man, Florida is like about to be the like hot spot of helping veterans, which is so exciting. And it's so incredible because if one state can do it, then that's the model for the rest of the nation. And that's what's needed. So thank you, first of all, for everything that you're doing and for all your hard work, your team's hard work, all the watchstanders' hard work. If you're a watchstander and you're listening, thank you so much for what you're doing and playing your part to end veteran suicide. Nick, to end this episode today, are there any last words or a piece of advice that you want to leave the listeners with?
I always like to say, Rachel, that veterans are folks who've written a blank check up to and including their lives to protect our community. And the Firewatch and our Watchstander program in particular is a way for the community to give back to them. So thank you so much for highlighting the program. We really appreciate it, Rachel. This was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you for taking the time to listen in today. With your support, we are able to increase awareness of the mental health issues affecting service members and veterans today with the goal of creating positive change. If you got value from this episode, please take 30 seconds to subscribe and share this episode within your own network. Until next time, remember, your story matters, your mental health matters, and your story doesn't end here.